17th century America was a very religious world, and people believed fervently in God, and along with that was a belief in the devil. And so what being a witch meant to people in the 17th century was that somebody had, usually a woman, but not always, had signed a contract with the devil, and that contract gave the devil permission to go into that person's body, take their shape, and go around and harm other people. First of all, since they did live in a religious world, they had to go to church services. They heard about God and the devil all the time during a regular week. Ministers were always talking about God and Satan, and how you had to be careful not to go down Satan's path, basically. The important part for this is that Puritans were very concerned that if they were looking for signs to see whether or not they were among the elect, and that meant whether or not they would go to heaven once they died. And so they were also looking for signs that they were actually going to hell, and looking for signs that maybe Satan was taking them along that path. So all of this business about witchcraft, when the witchcraft accusation started in 1692, it didn't come from out of nowhere. I mean, they were just very used to thinking about God and the devil in these kind of very, proximate ways, that God and the devil were always around. In New England, there were over 200 accusations during the Salem crisis. And so all of those records of people being accused, of people undergoing an examination, going to trial, all of this was written down. One of the questions that sometimes comes up when I teach this material is, why would a person confess to witchcraft? It doesn't seem like it would have a good outcome. Why? Because the rule was, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, which meant that somebody who was a witch was going to be killed. So why would you confess to this? It doesn't seem to make any sense. Well, one of the reasons, but this didn't come to light till pretty far into the whole process, but one of the reasons was that all of the confessors ended up living. And all of the people who denied ended up being hanged. Now, people didn't know that this was going to happen in the beginning of the whole process, but I find this really interesting, like what was going on here. At first, the confessors, they just kept them in prison. And the reasoning was that they wanted them to confess and name more names, who else was involved in this witchcraft scheme. So they kept them in jail to, hoping that would happen. And then ultimately, when the whole thing was over, they were released. The deniers, as we'll see, the deniers were just never believed. When a person supposedly, when they became a witch, that meant that they had given themselves over to the devil by signing this pact. So that was kind of like the worst thing that you could do on a spectrum of sin. I mean, obviously, signing the devil's pact, that's like the absolute worst thing that you could do. But it was a sin, and there was a spectrum of sins in the Puritan world. And so what we see with the deniers is that they tried to deny, no, I had nothing to do with the devil, I had nothing to do with signing his pact. Really, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I do everything right. And they would have supporters come in to say, to court saying, yes, my wife or my aunt or my cousin or daughter, whoever, was the model of Puritan womanhood. They didn't say it in those words, but she's just perfect. She could never have done this pact with the devil. And then they would try to push the person to see, well, haven't you done some sin? Haven't you let the devil in the door even just a little bit? And then these women who were good Puritan women kind of had to admit that, yeah, okay, maybe a little bit. I let Satan in the door. And then the accusers, the court would just kind of seize on that, saying, really? You let the devil in your heart? What did he look like? What shape? When did he come to you? And kind of push them. So let me give an example of that. Okay, so this is a woman named Rebecca Eames. She was accused of witchcraft. And her confession, well, I'll just read this. You can see how several things are blending together here in her confession. She says, she explains to the court that after making a black mark with her finger, sealing the covenant, so she's admitting that she's signed the devil's book, and this is a quote from the source. She was then in such horror of conscience that she took a rope to hang herself and a razor to cut her throat by reason of her great sin in committing adultery. And by that the devil gained her, he promising she should not be brought out or ever discovered. So that's her confession. It doesn't really say anything about witchcraft, doing anything wrong, harming any other people. What it says is that she signed this compact with the devil because he told her she wouldn't get found out about the sin of adultery. So she's bringing something else up altogether. I mean, this is one of the occasions where I want to just yell back to Rebecca, don't mention the adultery. That's not what they're asking you. Just talk about witchcraft. You didn't do it. So, this confession really displays this terrible confusion on the part of some women who I think confessed, and we'll see how they talk about the deniers in kind of a different way. But the idea is that some women, I think, unwittingly said, yes, I signed the devil's book, when really they meant, yes, I've done some sin in my life, as everybody did. I mean, there wouldn't have been any person who would have said, especially not a woman, I'm free from sin. I mean, that just wasn't part of their worldview of how sin and godliness worked.